So there's a bunch of different forms that pricing power can take, as I mentioned. One of them is monopoly. That's one that we're going to focus on today. Next week, we're going to start talking about some of the other forms that it can take that are not monopoly. Monopoly is the easiest to think about, so we'll start with that. A monopoly is a market in which only one firm operates. Okay? Now, unless you get really sort of pedantic about it, they're pretty rare in real life. It's pretty rare that any large market has exactly literally one producer. There are these markets, but even in a really heavily dominated market, there's usually a few tiny competitors, which would technically make it not a monopoly. But two notes about that. One, if you define a market narrowly enough, everything's a monopoly. So clearly the cafe downstairs does not have a monopoly on cafes. There's lots of different cafes competing, but they have a monopoly on cafes in this building, I guess. But that's so technically, but also no. You want to define the market that's actually pretty relevant. People would consider others to be competitors, so that's not a monopoly really. Also, even though technically, if there's some small competitors, it makes it not a monopoly anymore. We would still call something a monopoly if it's really heavily dominated by one firm, even if it's not 100%. So if the market is really close to domination, we might still say, yeah, this monopoly model is going to do a good job of figuring things out, right? Yeah, sure, maybe they're not a true monopoly, but they're close enough to it that this is really going to describe what's going on. When we get on monopolies, they will end up with higher than efficient prices, right? Here's the efficient price, here's the price we end up with, and lower than efficient quantities. Here's the quantity we end up with. There are, however, some examples of pure monopolies. So one example is satellite radio. So satellite radio some people still use it. Started in 2001. In 2001, XM Radio launched a satellite radio service with a subscription fee. Basically what it is you buy a little special radio box. It sits in your car or on your counter or whatever. You pay a subscription for these like premium radio channels, right? Sort of like Spotify if it was all radio. I guess it's sort of like Pandora. It's like Pandora, right? It's not like you're choosing exactly what you get, but there's a lot of different special stations. I've had like rental cars with this, and then there's like the Billy Joel station, and it's 24 hours of Billy Joel all the time. And then there's the, whatever station. So whatever you want, right? It's sort of, it's a little bit more choosy. And they also have like lots of like big name talk show hosts, so like Howard Stern went on there, was on there for a long time. So before internet radio came along, this was really the big deal. In 2001, XM Radio launched, and then in 2002, there was a competitor, Sirius Satellite Radio. So for years, they had a lot of trouble making profit, right? Neither of them was particularly profitable. Even though they each had lots and lots of shows, like they were doing a lot of business, right? Lots of people subscribed to their show. They had a lot of big hit shows people wanted to listen to. And even though it was a small market with only two competitors, so not a monopoly, they still weren't making profit, right? They were spending more than they were making. So then in 2008, they merged. So when you merge in this country, you have to put in a request for merging to the government, right? So they can look over it and say, is this going to negatively affect the amount of competition in this market to the extent it's going to hurt customers? So that's sort of the criteria that they use. The government said, yes, we're going to let you merge. We can see that neither of you is viable on your own, but we're not going to let you raise prices. So they said, we will allow you to merge on the condition that your subscription price does not go up for 3 years. Okay? So clearly, this is what they were trying to avoid. They thought maybe with two competitors, we might be maybe not here, but like close to this price right here. And we're worried that you'll raise prices here, which would be not so good for consumers, right? Raise the prices up. So they did. They merged. For 3 years, they did not raise their prices. And in 2011, when the 3 years were up, they immediately raised their prices as soon as they were legally allowed to do so. And the the company finally became profitable, which was not before. And this is exactly what you expect, because monopolies, you would expect to make more profit than firms with any sort of competitors at all, right? Because you are going to be able to get away with charging more. They could have tried charging this amount before, but if XM had gone up here, then Sirius would be like, we're going to be the low-cost one, and everyone's going to come get us instead, right? That's the whole idea of how competition is going to keep those prices lower. The fact that they had not chosen to go up here before merging tells you that that amount of competition is enough to actually keep them from raising their prices, right? These companies don't keep prices low out of the goodness of their hearts, right? Or because they can afford to. They do it because that is the profit maximizing price. If they raised their prices, it would reduce their profit because they would lose people to their competitors. But you take away the competitors, you merge the companies, now they're not competing anymore. Suddenly, the higher price, you can't compete with them, right? They can raise their price to that amount. There's no one else to take the customers, and they're profitable. Right now, they are still the only satellite radio provider. This is a relatively rare example of a true monopoly industry outside of something like government, where they're the only ones who are allowed to provide it. They have 100% market. That said, the market itself is tricky, but for a while it was doing pretty good. So we can ask ourselves, why do we end up with a monopoly, right? Why do we end up with a market that has a monopoly in it where there's only one firm going on? So in the case of, say, Sirius and XM, new competitors would have had a lot of difficulty starting up. Remember, the idea where you get pricing power comes from, is you have to have some sort of barrier to entry. There has to be something keeping those competitors from coming in and competing against you. One of the difficulties in the satellite radio business, in coming in to compete with them, is the big fixed costs, right? If you want to start a satellite radio company, you have to A, launch a bunch of satellites, which is really expensive, and B, you have to get a bunch of radio content, which is also really expensive. Either you're licensing the entire Billy Joel back catalog, or you have to hire, big name radio people, right? So there's that keeping people out of the market. Also the fact that it'd be really hard to pick up, right? There's a bit of a network effect going on here as well, right? We talked about network effects last time as being a source of pricing power. And so we get that same problem. Like, imagine you're the new satellite radio provider, and the customer's excited, well, do I get the Sirius XM one or do I get the new one? Well, which one has the shows that I want to listen to? Probably Sirius. And so I'm going to go ahead and just get Sirius as well. The more popular one has the best show. And now I'm a new radio producer. I want to decide, am I going to go with the new one or am I going to make my show just for Sirius XM? Well, I want the one that has all the listeners on it, so I'm going to go with Sirius XM. Right? So everyone sort of gravitates to the same option, which is going to make it very hard to get started as a new competitor in this field. Also, just the knowledge that when there were two competitors in this field, it lowered the profits just enough that neither of them were profitable, which could also keep somebody out of the market. It's worth noting that what really broke this, the real draw to them was A, that you could choose what kind of music you want to listen to more than you could on the radio, and B, they had all the top talk radio people on here, and both of those things went away. Right, the network effect died because now there's other better places that started up in different areas, right? So now Spotify has blown that both of them way out of the water, right? But they didn't come into the exact same space, right? They came in a different way. And then once they were big enough to get past those fixed costs, they could, hire Joe Rogan or whatever.